What made me really start the winery at Bull Run was because I had property that was in a pretty good location for a vineyard and a winery. That the more that my wife and I went out to visit other wineries and got to see what those properties had to add, and the beauty of the settings around them, and the locations and the history, I started thinking, well, maybe I could convert my farm into a winery, but a winery that was closer in and a little bit better suited for people to be able to come visit. Also, I thought that our location had a lot more history and a lot more beauty to offer. So the vision for the winery at Bull Run really came to be over the many years prior to us starting the development. With my wife and I would go out to all the different wineries across Virginia and even in West Coast and other locations across the country. And one of the things I found that was so very interesting to me was that each individual winery owners would have an idea of what a winery should be. And it was amazing the differences between all the different wineries, whether you were a historical type winery or let's say you were going to copy the Bordeaux style of a French winery, or maybe you were a Mediterranean, whatever your culture background or maybe your family history was in winemaking. So when I thought about what a winery should be for myself and my wife in this region, I thought it would be appropriate to honor this land and all the history that surrounds it. And with the Virginia winemaking history, starting with really Thomas Jefferson and of course Daniel Norton, with the 18th and 19th century kind of the bucolic setting that we've established, I thought it would be appropriate to take us back in time, 150 to 200 years ago, in which you could drink these wines that really that represent the time period in which Virginia was really getting onto the scene and making Virginia wine. But at the same time, here living or having the property on the Civil War battlefield of Bull Run is also taking and respecting the fact that we are on location here at such a major historical battlefield, and kind of tying in that experience. So when people come to a winery, it's an experience as much as the wine, and so be able to provide that experience where people come here and they feel like they've literally transported themselves back in time, I think is very important. Some of the biggest challenges in starting the winery were the initial capital investments and the patience that it takes. So I still run a very successful remodeling business and have done so 20 years prior to opening the winery. And so if I were to say to get contracted to build a house, well, it'd be quite simple. I could pick up the 2x4s from Home Depot tomorrow and build a house. But with the winery business, if you were to drink a glass of wine today, that wine would have been made at least 1.5 to 2 years ago from grapes that were grown the previous season, from a vine that was planted on the ground at least 3 to 4 to 5 years in advance. So enormous amount of capital investment to get it to the point where the winery was serving very well-to-do established vines with finely crafted wines that can be enjoyed and in a setting that was comfortable to your average person in Northern Virginia. And that takes an enormous amount of time and capital and planning. And fortunately, it was an adventure that I was excited to get into. But you always kind of have to trick your mind into thinking it's not as much effort as it truly is. Otherwise, you talk yourself out of a lot of dreams. There's a lot of discussion about what type of plants and vines would grow in this area. So I did a lot of experimenting. I planted multiple different varietals in small blocks. I would drive all the way out from my house with my 350-gallon water tank in the back of the pickup truck and hand water each one. So it was an evolution over time. When it got to the point that the certain vines grew well and I planted more of them, and my remodeling business started doing a little bit better after the Great Recession, and I slowly but surely cleared more of the land, it got to the point where it was time to act or forever talk about my dream. So I decided to finally act. One of the great things about our winery, I like to say it's about wine, of course, it's about history, and it's about fun. And so we've spoken a little bit about the wine, and I think anybody who's come here can touch on the fun part, but the history is very unique, very interesting to me. This particular piece of property is located on privately held land adjacent to the Manassas battlefield. And while the battle might have started here, the major engagement was further to the west. So this would have been kind of a staging area for the beginning of the Bull Run. But this is also the location of where the picnickers came out to watch the battle. So this is the first battle of the Civil War. And many people remember, if they remember any Civil War history at all, it would have been like 4th or 5th grade history about how strange it was that all these picnickers came out from Washington, D.C. and the politicians and civilians to watch the battle. So this would have been that staging area. But one of the reasons why it's so important to me, and I think with the county and the state and should be across the country, is in order for us to save some of these sites, we need to make them so that a business can survive and flourish in these locations. A business such as ours, where we have 225 acres, and we're marrying agritourism with history, accessible to the public, tells the history and the location, but yet we're able to grow grapes on site and save this beautiful piece of property. I think that's what makes this place so unique, is that we're marrying history and agritourism, and even better in a place that's densely populated like Fairfax County. And so that's why I think many of the residents in the local municipalities are so happy that they're able to have a business such as ours on this property, and also creates the perfect transitional space to the battlefield rather than surrounded by houses right up to a historical line. We're the perfect transitional business. We try to make it too with that transition so that everything from the historical markers that show what happened on this hill to the old Hillwood Mansion that was a Civil War hospital on site, and to the architecture, building our tasting barn with reclaimed lumber, some of the historical structures, maintaining them, all the way down to the old split rail fences, maintaining this property as if it were a 150 to 200-year-old setting, so that you feel like you're easing your way into the battlefield, so to speak. So one of the many things I like about actually owning a winery, and there are many, but I think probably 2 or 3 of the most important ones are, number one is representing Virginia's place in history. The fact that Virginia winemaking in 1820 with Dr. Norton and having the first successfully grown grape in North America is a history that is not often told. So being able to promote that story and tell that story, that everything that happened in the New World started here in Virginia first, I think that's very important. So I feel proud as a placeholder in history that I'm doing my part in telling that story. Actually, just walking out here on a Friday afternoon without the Bull Run shirt, just a nameless individual, and seeing all the people out here enjoying themselves when they read the placards on the history of the old mansion here, the Hillwood Mansion, or if you just see a bunch of old friends getting together having a laugh, or you see a son and his father looking over the landscape, maybe petting a horse, that type of thing. To know that you have created this place that provides such tremendous satisfaction and enjoyment is probably the best reward of them all. Okay, favorite wine. Well, that's a tough one because in many ways I love them all. It's kind of like children, you can't pick your favorite, and in my case actually 2 of my wines are named after children, so I definitely can't pick my favorite. So I would say a red. I would go typically in the fall and winter, go with Norton or Meritage. Norton because the Virginia story started in 1820s and grown here on site. And then Meritage because it's such a well-respected worldwide wine that I think we do such a great job with it. So while not everybody will know what Norton is, certainly everybody know what Meritage is, and I'm happy to show off ours against theirs. White wines, typically the summer and the spring. That's when I kind of switch gears. I really like our stainless Chardonnay. I do like our barrel-aged Chardonnay to put up against it, but I prefer the stainless personally. Delaney, of course, because my firstborn, small amount of residual sugar, very easy drinking wine, hot summer day, very refreshing. But Lily's Viognier, because Viognier is our state grape. We happen to have over 10 acres of Viognier planted at our vineyard in Rappahannock County. And that's a wine that does very well, is not a blend, and it's a testament to all of our hard work and efforts from the vineyard all the way. The ways in which the winery at Bull Run has grown in the last 5 years have just been absolutely tremendous. Challenging, exciting, very proud, very stressed at times. But just to give you a few quick numbers, when we first opened 5 years ago, we opened with 1,300 cases. And now we're producing bottling close to 13,000 cases a year. Give you an idea on acreage, when we first opened, we had 3 acres of vineyard on site, Norton Vineyard. And of course had leases on many other vineyards across the state to produce our grapes and make wine. Now we're up to over 50 acres under vine. And that puts us in the upper 5 percentile of the entire state of the Virginia wine industry. So those are just ways to kind of quantify the growth that we've had. The quality over quantity is what I see us focusing on over the next 5, 6, 7 years. And I think given the hundreds of acres that we sit on and the wonderful staff, wonderful group of management, all the grapes now that we are growing, our wonderful location, and all of our collective drive to succeed positions us very well for the future. The advice that I could give myself 5 years ago, wow, where do I start? I think if I were to give advice for anybody thinking about getting in the wine industry, whether you want to open up your own winery or become part of the winery scene part-time, or maybe you want to jump in full-time, maybe you're a student studying, there's tremendous potential. So as far as an industry, we're growing enormously. We were the 203rd winery when we opened 5 years ago. There are now close to 300 wineries, to give you an idea of the growth potential. But I would say no matter where you're coming from and how you want to get into this business, make sure that you go out and try those positions at wineries before you understand what you're getting yourselves into, because it is a business just like any other business. Sure, it's enjoyable and it's rewarding, but it's a lot of hard work, a lot of effort, and most people, including myself, don't go into this business to get rich, because that's not going to happen. Keep your day job, because just in case you decide that you want to just put 1 foot in the water and take 1 foot back out, that you haven't sacrificed all to be in this industry. And this sounds very cliche, but I would say, try as best as you can to enjoy the journey, not the destination, because there are so many facets of this business. While I was doing them at the time, I couldn't wait for the next chapter, and it's kind of odd looking back 5 years ago. I think of all those steps that I went through and how exciting it is to look back at those pictures and relive those moments. Whether it's putting your first vine in the ground, to making your first vintage, to selling your 100th bottle, to reaching your 100th customer, to opening day, to 1 year anniversary. All those things are why I believe people should be going into the Virginia wine business. Very rewarding, but a lot of hard work. It just took a lot of time and a lot of investment, but it's been exciting. It's been exciting, the entire journey, from the very beginning until 5 years later. It's been quite a challenge, but I find that not only meeting those challenges are fun, but I also look forward to the next ones around the corner.